I want to start with a number. 1820, that is the exact year the greatest historical erasure in human history was officially catalogued as a discovery. They put it in every textbook, etching it onto every timeline as the moment. 3 separate naval expeditions, British, American, and Russian, simultaneously stumbled upon a massive, frozen continent at the bottom of the Earth. But this wasn't a discovery. It was a containment operation. Because exactly 4 years earlier, the sky went completely dark. A civilization-ending atmospheric blackout shattered the globe, plunging the world into a localized nuclear winter that flash froze a once thriving, architecturally advanced landmass solid. The ice you see today didn't take millions of years to form. It happened practically overnight. And what lies buried beneath that 2-mile-thick glacial sheet is the very thing the modern historical record was designed to make you forget. The official timeline is a manufactured lie. And the proof isn't just hidden in ancient, suppressed maps showing green valleys, where only ice exists today. The proof is in the military armadas, the global treaties, and the impossible architecture left behind. We need to return to the dark. Specifically, to 1816. Mainstream historians politely refer to 1816 as the year without a summer. The official explanation is tidy. It is clean. They tell us that Mount Tambora, a single volcano in Indonesia, erupted with such ferocity that it ejected enough ash into the stratosphere to blot out the sun. This, they claim, lowered global temperatures, destroyed harvests across the northern hemisphere, killed livestock, and triggered mass famine from New England to northern Europe. Summer turned into literal winter. Snow fell in June. The skies turned bruised shades of orange and purple. And for a long time, I accepted that story. I didn't question it, because a volcano is a safe, natural disaster. It requires no malicious intent. It requires no cover-up. But then I started pulling on threads that didn't belong to that story. The sheer, sweeping, continent-spanning simultaneity of the collapse doesn't fit the profile of a single volcanic eruption. Crop failures weren't just regional. They were total. The reports of unnatural cold and toxic-looking sunsets weren't clustered near Indonesia. They were everywhere, all at once. And it wasn't just the environment that collapsed. It was the human record. The years immediately following 1816 saw a cascade of institutional ruptures, massive population displacements, and a phenomenon that can only be described as civilizational amnesia. Entire communities seemed to lose continuity with what came before. The historical narrative resets. The atmospheric disruption of 1816 bore the exact hallmarks of something far more catastrophic and far more deliberate. It carried the precise signature of what we would today recognize as a nuclear winter. A sudden, total atmospheric blackout. Not from a mountain, but from a civilization-ending event. A forced reboot. This is the event loosely associated with the hypothesis of a global old world civilization. A society sophisticated, architecturally advanced, and connected across continents, which we have come to provisionally call Tartaria. This was not an empire in the conventional sense. It wasn't a country with borders drawn on a modern map. It was a presence. A civilization whose fingerprints are still visible everywhere, once you learn how to look for them. You see it in the impossible architecture, in the massive canal systems, in the intricate, star-shaped city grids that appear fully formed in the historical record of the 1800s. Without any construction documentation, without any scaffolding period, and without the messy, incremental archaeology that accompanies human settlement. And then, apparently, it was simply gone. Wiped clean by the darkness of 1816. But there is one detail in this timeline that feels too convenient. One date that sits too perfectly placed in the aftermath of the catastrophe. 1820. 4 years after the year without a summer. I want you to feel the weight of that gap. 4 years. Not a generation. Not a century. Exactly 4 years after what may have been the most catastrophic atmospheric event in recorded human history. An event where the entire world experienced freezing simultaneously. And then, miraculously, the world's most remote, most inaccessible, most sealed landmass is suddenly, officially discovered. And it wasn't just found by one wandering ship. It was discovered by 3 separate expeditions simultaneously. A British crew, an American crew, and a Russian crew. All operating independently, we are told. All navigating the most treacherous waters on Earth. All arriving in the exact same region. Within months of each other, in 1820. Now, I understand how exploration works. People chase discoveries. Expeditions overlap. But I am asking a different question. Not whether these ships arrived, but why then? Why, after millennia of human civilization? After the Phoenicians and the Greeks and the Romans and the Chinese? After every sophisticated maritime culture that ever put a hull to open water? Does the largest landmass south of the equator remain entirely undocumented until exactly 4 years? After the world's sky went dark, the conventional account shatters when you look at the cartographic record. And I mean deep into the archives. Archives that do not get cited in introductory history courses. Because the deeper you look, the more the 1820 discovery date looks less like an origin point. And more like a carefully coordinated cover story. There are maps. Actual, surviving, historically documented maps that show Antarctica long before 1820. Consider the Piri Reis map. Drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who explicitly stated he was compiling his work from much older source maps. The Piri Reis map shows a southern landmass with a highly detailed, accurate coastline. This isn't a vague, speculative blob drawn by a cartographer guessing at the shape of the world. It is a charted coastline. In the 20th century, researchers overlaid the Piri Reis map against modern seismic profiles of the subglacial terrain of Queen Maud Land. The actual bedrock, the stone sitting beneath 2 miles of solid ice, aligned with a precision that mainstream academia has never adequately explained. But the Piri Reis map is just the beginning. The Orontius Phineas map, published in 1531, goes further. It depicts Antarctica without ice. It shows intricate river systems, sweeping mountain ranges, and internal geographic drainage patterns. Let me say that again, slowly, because the gravity of this fact is easy to skip past. A map drawn in 1531 shows internal geographic features of Antarctica that humanity did not technologically confirm until the invention of deep penetrating sonar in the 1950s. The official academic explanation breaks down instantly under the weight of that reality. Mainstream historians call it a coincidence. They call it lucky extrapolation. They suggest that ancient cartographers were simply guessing at a southern landmass for philosophical reasons, believing the northern continents needed to be balanced by a southern one. Maybe the concept of a southern continent was a guess. But how do you guess a river system? How do you guess subglacial mountain ridges? How do you guess a coastline with enough mathematical accuracy that it survives comparison to satellite and seismic data? 5 centuries later, you don't guess that. You map it. You map it from observation, from presence, and from knowledge that was either first-hand or inherited from someone who walked that green grass. And that raises the question the mainstream record refuses to answer. Who was walking there? If you are finding this investigation worth your time, consider subscribing. We are exploring the blind spots of human history, the places the textbooks refuse to illuminate. And having you here for the journey means everything. Now, let's look at the ice. In the previous video, I laid out the case that the atmospheric blackout of 1816 functioned as the terminal moment of an old world civilization. It was an ending. But what if 1816 was also a beginning? What if the same mechanism that turned summer to winter across Europe and North America also, in some rapid, compounding way, drove aggressive glaciation at the poles? What if Antarctica, the lush, ice-free continent clearly visible on 16th century maps, was subjected to a sudden, catastrophic flash freeze? I am not presenting this as an absolute conclusion. I am presenting it as a pattern. A shape of timing, geography, and suppression that you cannot unfocus your eyes from once you see it. 1816, the sky goes dark. A global atmospheric event disrupts civilization. 1820, Antarctica is discovered. Officially entered into the record. Named, catalogued, and quietly claimed. the timeline doesn't stop there. The knowledge of what Antarctica actually is, and what lies buried beneath its sudden ice, kept surfacing. Decades later, this thread was picked up by people who had every resource in the world to go and look for themselves. In 1938, 7 years before the end of World War II, Nazi Germany launched a massive expedition to the Antarctic. It was called the New Swabia Expedition. Aboard the ship Schwabenland, they mapped hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of territory along the Princess Martha coast. They flew Dornier-Wall seaplanes over the ice, dropping thousands of heavy metal darts embossed with swastikas to assert territorial dominance. What was the Third Reich looking for? The official story claims they were scouting locations for a whaling station to secure fat supplies for margarine and soap. Margarine. That is the lie we are sold. The reality is that senior figures in the Nazi scientific apparatus had a documented obsession with ancient knowledge, lost civilizations, and inherited cartographic traditions. They had the same maps we have been discussing, and they sent a fleet to follow them. What they found remains obscured. But German submarines were documented operating in Antarctic waters as late as 1945. The Americans knew the Germans had found something, because exactly 1 year after World War II ended, while Europe was still in ruins and the global economy was shattered, the United States Navy didn't rest. Instead, they launched Operation Highjump. August 1946. The U.S. Navy deployed a full military armada to the Antarctic. This was not a small scientific research team. This was Task Force 68. 13 massive naval ships, including an aircraft carrier, a submarine, and 2 icebreakers. 33 aircraft, and nearly 4,700 heavily armed military personnel. The entire operation was led by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, one of the most decorated and seasoned polar explorers in American history. The stated objective was scientific mapping and research, and testing military equipment in frigid conditions. But you do not send an aircraft carrier and 4,700 combat-hardened sailors to test snow boots and look at penguins. You send an armada of that scale because you are expecting a threat, or because you are securing a perimeter. Admiral Byrd's central group pushed deep into the Ross ice shelf. They mapped vast stretches of the continent from the air. And upon his return, Admiral Byrd gave a haunting interview where he explicitly warned that the United States needed to adopt protective measures against the possibility of an invasion by hostile aircraft flying directly over the polar regions. An invasion from the poles. In 1947. Who held the knowledge of this continent? Some chain of hands preserved the true topography of Antarctica across centuries, across the 1816 rupture. Intact enough for an Ottoman admiral, a Nazi expedition, and an American naval fleet to follow the exact same breadcrumbs to the exact same frozen wasteland. And whatever they found there, it terrified them enough to lock the entire continent down. This brings us to the most vital, and most overlooked aspect of the Antarctica deception. You cannot go there. I want to be incredibly precise about this, because the casual, immediate response is always, of course you can go to Antarctica. People go on cruises there all the time. Yes, they do. You can pay tens of thousands of dollars to stand on a heavily supervised peninsula for 2 hours, take a picture with a penguin, and be escorted back to your ship. You can go as part of a government-sanctioned scientific mission. But you cannot freely explore the interior. In 1959, at the absolute boiling point of the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union were pointing nuclear arsenals at each other's throats and fighting proxy wars across the globe, 12 nations sat down in Washington, D.C. and signed the Antarctic Treaty. Today, that treaty is ratified by over 50 nations. The treaty designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve. It explicitly prohibits military activity, nuclear testing, and independent mineral extraction. On paper, it sounds like a beautiful triumph of environmentalism and peace. In practice, it is an invisible wall. The treaty makes independent, unsupervised exploration of the Antarctic interior practically impossible. It requires logistical support that only massive governments can provide, and permits that are quietly, systematically denied to anyone operating outside of approved, state-sponsored parameters. Antarctica is functionally the only landmass on planet Earth where the ordinary citizen is forbidden from wandering. You can climb Mount Everest recreationally. You can cross the lethal sands of the Sahara alone. You can sail a fiberglass boat into the deadliest storms of the Pacific. But you cannot walk freely across the ice of Antarctica. Why does that feel normal to us? 50 nations. 50 competing, warring, ideologically opposed nations. All agreeing flawlessly, maintaining the exact same strict perimeter for over 6 decades. About a frozen wasteland that officially contains nothing but ice. The coordination problem is staggering. Nations do not agree on borders. They do not agree on human rights. They do not agree on trade. But they all agree, with absolute, unwavering solidarity, to keep you out of the Antarctic interior. What requires an international treaty of that magnitude? To answer that, we have to look at the architecture problem. Because this is where the Tartaria connection stops being abstract theory and becomes terrifyingly concrete. Across this series, we have documented the undeniable presence of old world construction techniques in places they have no business existing. We have looked at massive, intricately designed civic infrastructure in North American cities supposedly founded in the early 19th century by pioneers with wooden wagons. Cities that possessed elaborate sewer systems, subterranean tunnels, and towering cathedrals. That would have required decades of labor, advanced supply chains, and millions of bricks. Resources that those young, rugged settlements simply did not have. We have examined the mud flood evidence, the buried ground floors, the massive arched windows built directly into the dirt, sitting below modern street levels. This isn't regional. It's happening in Paris, in New York, in Moscow, in Buenos Aires. The pattern is global. A massive, interconnected architectural footprint of a highly advanced society that was suddenly, violently buried. Every time we point this out, the official explanation is a casual hand wave. They tell us the streets were raised. They tell us the builders were incredibly fast. But the supply chains don't exist in the records. The transition periods are missing. The story is a fabrication designed to hide the fact that something was already there. Something built by someone who came before the reset. Now, bring that lens to Antarctica. We know from the 1531 Orontius Phineas map that Antarctica was habitable in historical time. It is not geologically ancient history. It is human history. Recent enough that the map survived. If the old world Tartarian civilization spanned the entire globe, building the impossible, unreplicable structures we see half buried in our modern cities, what did they build on their southernmost continent? What is sitting under 2 miles of solid ice right now? I am not claiming there are literal pyramids under the Ross Ice Shelf, though ground-penetrating radar in the Ellsworth Mountains has revealed geometric anomalies that have sparked fierce, hushed debate among independent geologists. I am asking a much more dangerous question. Why don't we know? It is 2026. We possess satellite systems capable of reading the date on a dime. From low Earth orbit, we have ground-penetrating radar that can map subterranean caverns on Mars. The full weight of the most technologically advanced civilization in recorded history is pointed at every square inch of this planet. And yet, the subglacial topography of the Antarctic interior remains largely unmapped at high resolution. The data gaps cluster precisely in the deep interior. The very places the treaty prevents you from walking. The silence is deafening. No serious institutional inquiry into the coordination of the 1820 discovery. No mainstream academic investigation into the 1531 ice-free maps. No explanation for how a continent that took millions of years to freeze was charted with flowing rivers by Renaissance mapmakers. Silence on this scale, maintained across this many disciplines, enforced by this many nations, for this long, that is not an absence of evidence. That is a shape. It is the silhouette of a massive, deliberate cover-up. If we accept, even provisionally, that a highly sophisticated global civilization existed prior to the 19th century. If we accept that the catastrophic blackout of 1816 was the weaponized terminal breath of that society, raining mud and ash across the northern cities. And if we accept that Antarctica, the last green sanctuary on those ancient maps, was flash frozen, locked down by military armadas, and sealed behind a 50-nation treaty, then we have to ask the ultimate question. What are they protecting? Are they protecting us from the ice? Or are they protecting what is under the ice from us? Perhaps it is the final, undeniable proof of the old world. The undisturbed, unlooted ruins of the Tartarian motherland. A place where the architecture wasn't just buried by mud, but perfectly preserved in a 2-mile-thick tomb of sudden ice. If an independent researcher with a drill and a camera breached that ice and beamed the footage to the world, the entire narrative of human progress, of Darwinian evolution, of our very place in history, would collapse overnight. They are terrified of casual, uncontrolled discovery. They are terrified of what you might find if you start digging. I don't have all the answers. I have been sitting in the dark with these historical fragments for months, and the deeper I dig, the more the darkness pushes back. I don't see the full face of this conspiracy, but I can feel its structure. I can run my hands along the walls of the lies they've built. A blackout in 1816. A discovery in 1820. A Nazi fleet in 1938. An American armada in 1946. A global lockdown in 1959. An empire erased. A continent renamed, restricted, and frozen just out of reach. I can't stop thinking about the number 1820. And after today, I don't think you will either. If this journey into the suppressed corners of our past means something to you, tell me your theories in the comments. The truth isn't going to come from the institutions that built the lie. It's going to come from us, putting the pieces together in the dark. The next video goes somewhere I previously thought was too dangerous to explore. I'm ready now. I'll see you there.